Paramount's Lioness is back for a third run, and Season 3, Episode 1 doesn't waste a second easing you in. It opens with gunfire, a hostage situation, and a fleet of attack drones tearing across the Russia-Ukraine border looking for Joe and her crew. The premiere doesn't hand you much of the bigger picture right away, but it plants the threat that's going to chase Joe and everyone she loves for the rest of the season. And here's the kicker. This was never America's fight to begin with. The CIA just couldn't walk away from a piece of intel, and that one decision is what put every name on Joe's list in the crosshairs. So let's get into it. Here's everything that went down in Episode 1 and where the season looks like it's heading. The episode kicks off in the present, with Joe getting a workout in at home while the news plays in the background, and the news is bad everywhere you look. France is buckling under civil unrest. Israel and Gaza remain locked in open conflict. There's fighting flaring up on the Pakistan-Afghanistan line. Brazil's got its own domestic mess brewing, and Russia and Ukraine are still tearing into each other. Chaos wall to wall. And in the middle of all of it, Joe is sitting behind a desk. If that surprises you, it shouldn't once you know what happened to her half a year earlier. We'll circle back to that. First, though, we get a quiet family morning. Breakfast at the table and Joe promising her husband Neil she'll actually make it home for dinner. If you've watched the first 2 seasons, you know that promise almost never holds because fieldwork doesn't let it. So the fact that she's even saying it tells you she's been kept away from operations for a while. She heads out calling her boss Kaitlyn Mead to say she's 20 minutes out, and that's the exact moment a car rear-ends her, shoving her into oncoming traffic before a second vehicle T-bones her from the side. Armed men pour out, drag her out of the wreck, and vanish, leaving her gun and phone behind like they were never even a concern. So who are they? To answer that, the show rewinds 6 months back to the mission that started all of this on the Ukrainian border. 6 months earlier, CIA officer Joe McNamara gets approached at a Kiev bar called The Net, fittingly enough, by a woman named Oleksandra. Kyle clocks it immediately as a possible honey trap and keeps his distance. Then he runs into her again, this time at the Ukrainian embassy, and learns she's actually FISU, Ukraine's own foreign intelligence service, who embedded herself inside Russia's SVR back in 2018 and has been feeding information out ever since. Why reach out to an American agent at all? She won't say outright, but she wants a face-to-face meeting with a CIA officer on U.S. soil to lay out what she's offering. A week passes and Joe meets her on the Georgetown campus, where Oleksandra reveals she has actionable intel on Alexei Yurimov, the man running Russia's Department of Special Tasks, essentially Putin's personal enforcer. Putin has just repositioned him to the front near Donetsk, which suggests something major is being planned for Ukraine, and that's exactly why Ukrainian intelligence wants him gone. The problem is Ukraine can't touch him directly. Putin's retaliation would be brutal, but if their rival America grabs him instead, it reads as just another move in the same old game. Oleksandra makes it clear how much Alexei means to Putin, but Joe still isn't sold on what her own agency actually gets out of this. She tells Oleksandra plainly that the CIA won't move without something in return, though we're never told on screen what that something is. That's likely a thread the writers are saving for Episode 2. What we do know is that the second Joe leaves campus, she tells Bobby and 2 Cups they're headed to Ukraine, meaning she's already made the call before running it up the chain. And remember, this was never Washington's war, so whatever Ukraine promised in exchange must be significant. There's also a nagging detail worth sitting with. Oleksandra herself admits her specialty is recruitment and infiltration. So is she steering the CIA into a proxy confrontation with Moscow to take heat off Kiev? Or is a double agent, by definition, working every side at once for her own reason? The show's leaving that open for now. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of scene-by-scene digging we do every week on every major spy thriller and prestige drama. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this Lioness Season 3 coverage. This is where the show clearly spent its action budget, and it earns it. The sequence is tense from start to finish. Joe's team, Bobby, Cruz, 2 Cups, Tex, and the rest link up in Donetsk with Kyle, Cody Spears, played by series creator Taylor Sheridan himself, Amber Whalen, and Cody's unit, all working out of a bunker dug into the border. Cody briefs Joe on the objective: extract Alexei Yurimov, who's currently moving through a gas pipeline tunnel on the Russian side that's being used to support their offensive. The team's edge comes from something unexpected. The SSD has been chipping its own agents with locators, and the mole feeding intel, almost certainly Oleksandra, hands over Alexei's exact coordinates, which makes tracking him possible. Cody's plan is to hit the trenches with a drone swarm first, forcing the North Korean troops stationed there to take cover, buying his team a window to slip across using river fog as concealment. Dogs go in first, then the operators drop into the trenches and push toward a farmhouse that connects down into the tunnel network. It's a brutal, messy operation, but they pull it off, cutting the tracking chip out of Alexei's arm and detonating the site behind them, so Russian command assumes their senior officer died in the blast. One thing worth flagging: Cody keeps most of Joe's team out of the actual raid, Cruz being the exception, because none of them have real trench warfare experience or training against drone swarm. It's also a black operation by design. If even one of Joe's people had gone down during it, the American press would start asking uncomfortable questions about a dead soldier nobody could explain. So Cody's orders are simple. Everyone stays in the bunker except Joe, since she's the only one who can visually confirm the target. And for anyone wondering, yes, one of Grady's dogs doesn't make it back alive, and Grady carries the body home himself. They wiped out a squad of enemy soldiers soldiers for one chess piece, and Joe's not convinced the trade was worth it. Once the team is safely back at base, Joe pulls Cruz aside and admits something's eating at her. They just killed a group of people over what amounts to a single chess piece, referring to Alexei as Putin's queen on the board. She points out this war was never theirs to fight, and yet they crossed enemy lines to grab a target who may turn out to be worthless to them. Honestly, that's a fair read because realistically, who greenlit this? If it came from Joe's own chain of command, what upside is there in kidnapping a high-ranking Russian officer who will absolutely never talk? It's entirely possible the CIA just handed Putin a fresh reason to escalate against Ukraine for nothing. Cruz pushes back a little, arguing that since both special forces and the CIA were sent in together, someone above their pay grade clearly sees a bigger picture. We just haven't been shown it yet. Then the war follows Joe home. Late that same night, two men show up at her house claiming to be state police, and one of them has what sounds like a Russian accent. A strong hint these aren't local cops at all but foreign operatives sent to ask about Alexei. Given how fast they arrived, it's likely they'd already been watching Joe's home and moved the second she walked back through the door. She refuses to let them in. One kicks the door open, and Joe, still armed from work, shoots and kills him on her own porch. The second man bolts, but she takes him down too, then immediately calls it in and requests the FBI search her cover is now blown wide open. That night is almost certainly the reason Joe's sitting behind a desk in the present timeline. Gunning down two men in her own doorway isn't the kind of thing you walk away from unchanged. By pulling Alexei out of Russia, Joe didn't just complete a mission. She dragged the entire conflict back to her front porch and put her family directly in the blast radius. And we already know from Alexandra how much Putin values Alexei, which means these operatives won't hesitate to go after Joe's family next if it forces her agency to hand him back. It's likely the CIA relocated Joe and her family after that night, which would explain why it took Russian intelligence this long to find her again until they finally did and pulled her off the street, almost certainly as leverage to force an exchange. Or maybe there's someone inside the CIA feeding her location out and we just haven't met them yet. Episode 1 ends without confirming who exactly grabbed Joe or why, but given she was on the phone with Kaitlyn the second it happened, her team already knows and is likely mobilizing before we even get to episode 2. The season's trailer already shows Joe and Kyle sitting across from Alexandra in an interrogation room and a separate scene with Alexei in custody at a secure site. So once Joe gets free, expect her to start digging into who's really coming after her family and why. She may have kicked off a shadow war with Russia by accident, but there's no version of this where she lets them near her house again. That's the premiere, and it does exactly what a season opener should. It drops you into the chaos with almost no hand-holding and trusts you to catch up. My only real gripe is that we still don't know what Ukraine actually promised the CIA to make this operation worth the risk, and that gap is going to matter a lot once the fallout keeps piling up. But as a cold open for a new season, it delivers tension, stakes, and a genuinely brutal action sequence that earns its runtime. That's my full review of Lioness Season 3, Episode 1. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened at Joe's door and who you think is really pulling the strings behind her abduction. If you enjoyed this review, drop a like and subscribe for the rest of our Lioness Season 3 coverage, episode by episode. Thanks for watching.